Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In this video I'm going to talk about the new or fairly new Perpetual Cadenza strings by Pirastro. I already tested the regular perpetual strings. You can check out the video right here. As I was really pleased with the regular perpetual strings but found their sound a little bit on the more one-dimensional side, but with a good cutting edge, I was very curious to learn to know the Perpetual Cadenza strings. As all of you know, Pirastro is one of the market leaders in violin strings, and one of the best sets for violin strings I know come from them. Before we start the video, I want to give a big thanks to polychord.com, my sponsor for these string test videos. If you are from Europe, I really suggest to you to check out polychord.com. They have a really great service. They have fast shipping of the strings and really competitive prices. Link in the description if you are interested in shopping violin strings. So let's dive into the new Perpetual Cadenza strings. Let me start with talking a little bit about the tension of the strings and also what Pirastro's intention is with those strings. So the wording on the Pirastro page about the Perpetual Cadenza strings suggests that the Perpetual Cadenza strings are supposed to be a warmer, more colorful and lesser tension version of the regular perpetual strings. So when we look at the tension charts and compare the perpetual strings with the Perpetual Cadenza strings, we will see a big difference in tension from the individual strings and also from the string set as a whole. The biggest difference in string tension can be found on the D string. But always when you compare string tension, keep in mind that also the flexibility of the material of the strings is very important to their overall sound and also the playability. But the string tension can tell you already so much that you have a better playability under the left hand than with the regular perpetual strings. When I tried the regular perpetual strings, I was very pleased with the overall sound, the cutting edge of those strings, the projection qualities, and also the color palette. But I have to say there are certainly more colorful strings out there than the regular perpetual strings. So let's see if the Perpetual Cadenza strings are in that term an improvement and what other compromises we have to make to get more colors out of this perpetual strings. Another interesting fact when we compare the string tension is that the Perpetual Cadenza strings are also lower in tension than the Eva Perazzi Gold violin strings with the silver G string. So compared inside of the brand of Pirastro, the Perpetual Cadenza strings are really low tension strings for a synthetic core string. You can check out their tension charts on their webpage. They have a very detailed information there on the different string sets. It's very beneficial to compare inside the world of Pirastro strings because of the material. I think Pirastro is more on the side of a stiffer material than, for example, Tomastic Infeld strings, which are not so easy comparable in terms of string tension to Pirastro strings, because they have a different philosophy. So let's start with a little bit of a sound example, and I also have an early sound example which you will hear now. When I played this, the strings were fairly new on the violin. And let's see now, approximately half a year later, how the strings perform now. as usual, we will now go into the detail of the different strings of the string set, of the Perpetual Cadenza strings. And we will start with the lowest string, the G string. Let me first give you a small sound example of the G string. Due to its fairly low tension, the G string has a very good playability in the regard of the response to the bow and also in the regard of the playability under the left hand. So even in really high positions, the string feels quite easy to press down to the fingerboard. Still, the bow response is quite good. You can make the sound break with too much bow pressure, but the string is not so sensitive like, for example, a one gut string. To me, the sound is warm and full and really colorful for a synthetic core string, but it can get a little bit unfocused when we come to louder dynamics. I feel the string has certain limitation when it comes to loudness. Of course, the violin in itself is not a loud instrument, but if you want to compete with other instruments in terms of loudness and projection, I think this G string would not be the most powerful string. But we will come to that topic later. But the promises of Pirastro strings that this string is much more colorful and easier to play is certainly a given. Let's come to the D string, our most beloved string on the violin, usually. In terms of playability, one could say this D string really plays itself. It's so easy to play for the left hand, and also the response to the bow is immediate. That is typical for a low tension string, and especially the D string always, to me, feels easier to play than the G string and also is a little bit smaller in diameter. So it is the most pleasant feeling to play on a loose D string with not so much tension. But the lower tension, of course, brings also a little bit a lack of projection. And I can speak there from experience because I played those strings with a string quartet and I played the first violin. And when I had those strings on, I certainly had, compared to the strings I had before, which was the Vision Titanium solo strings from Thomastik Infeld, with the Perpetual Cadenza strings, I had a little bit to fight more for the same projection I had before with the Vision solo strings. The promise is held that Pirastro made for us, which is the easy playability and also the warm sound color. Because of the lesser tension of the string, the sound is really warm and not screaming at all. When it comes to low tension D strings, there is sometimes the problem that the low tension makes the string break easier under bow pressure. But I feel with this string it is not so much the case. While being low tension, I think the material is a little bit more stiff, so that you can dig into the string with more bow pressure or weight than with certain other D strings. I had really a problem with one of the best sounding D strings out there in the market in terms of bow pressure, and that was from the Thomastik Infeld Peter Infeld set. The D string there is even a little bit higher tension than the Pirastro Perpetual Cadenza D string. But still, with the Perpetual Cadenza string, I have a little bit more resistance to the bow, which is especially handy if you play chords and you have to have a little bit of bow pressure on the string to play loud chords, for example. And also because you play 2 or 3 strings at the same time, you cannot adjust the contact point between the bridge and the fingerboard accordingly for one string. That was a problem I had with the Peter Infeld strings. So all that gives us a warm sounding D string with a great response and lots of colors if you want to play in this quieter dynamic range. Let's come to the A string. To me, the A string is always a little bit a transition string. It certainly has a character of its own, but mainly its purpose is to give you a little bit more range for the high register and to make a transition from the lower strings, the G and the D string, to the E string. And I think this transitioning purpose is really good with this A string of the Perpetual Cadenza set. It is not a screaming A string and still has a singing open sound which transitions well to the E string, so that you can play, for example, in high positions on the A string and then transition to the E string in lower positions. The response to the bow is again really good. We are talking about a string set with fairly low tension, really low tension strings. So that should not be a surprise. The sound colors of the string are well implemented as a transition to the E string, but there's certainly a lack of edge in the sound. You really have to work hard to make the string put out a loud sound, a very focused and loud sound which can project against other stringed instruments playing in the same register as you play. But that was again to be expected from a lower tension strings, which is supposed to have a warmer sound and have a little bit more of a colorful sound and a wide range of sounds. All those factors get a little bit harder to achieve with a higher tension string. But with a higher tension string, you achieve more of this sizzling sound. These really high frequencies, which can make your sound stand out easier than with lower tension strings. So the last string is, as we all know, the E string, and let's check out the sound of the E string. Again, to me, it seems that the people at Pirastro know what they are doing. The E string fits the whole set quite well. It is not the most powerful E string, but it has, if you treat it with care, it has a really singing sound, and for an E string, a rather warm and full sound. Also, the sound colors which you can produce with this E string are significantly higher than, for example, with the E string of the Vision solo set by Tomasik Infeld, which is a very powerful string, but from the sound color more like an on and off thing. So it is hard to compare those strings to a high tension set of strings, which are also the perpetual regular strings. But as they come as a version of the perpetual regular strings, a low tension version, it is important to notice what are the improvements in terms of maybe color or warmth of the strings and playability, but also what will you potentially miss with those strings in specific situations. There's always the question when we talk about different strings, for whom are those strings made? My suggestion for those fairly low tension strings are that they are made for people who have inherently louder violins. Some violins, if you put high tension strings on them, they also break under the pressure of the strings and produce less sound than they would produce with the lower tension strings, especially old violins with an older setup, maybe also historical instruments. As most synthetic core strings are made as an imitation of the wound gut strings, I think the Perpetual Cadenza set has managed to get really close to the feeling of a gut string set. But before you rush to buy them, I would still prefer real wound gut strings sound-wise and playability-wise to a low-tension synthetic core string set. The Perpetual Cadenza strings could also be fitting for people who play mostly alone or just in small ensembles where they don't have to project so much. Also for players who play in the second violin section, for example. The warmth and the colors of those strings could certainly help the overall sound of a good orchestra. And also, of course, when you can get away with a little bit less projection, you will always benefit from the easier playability of those lower tension strings. So I would say, unless you have a really powerful instrument which has to be tamed a little bit with the strings, this string is not for soloists or for first violinists or for people who have to project against other loud instruments. They might be a good choice to, for example, record solo repertoire for violin. for example like Isai sonatas, also Bach sonatas, but when it comes to Bach or other Baroque music, I would prefer wound gut strings again, especially under recording conditions where you have time to tune them and you don't have the problem to deal with the tuning instability. You have a controlled environment, then I would prefer gut strings still because of the sound and of the playability, which is unreached to me from synthetic core strings. But for a more modern solo violin repertoire, where you don't want to sound that harsh with the microphone up fairly close, I think those strings could be a great choice for a recording session and also for a concert, of course, because you get more warmth, easier playability, and also the tuning stability, which you don't have when you play on gut strings. So as we come to a conclusion, I would say this well-balanced string set is more on the warmer end of the spectrum, but it is incredibly long-lasting. I have the strings now on for over 6 months and I played them quite much. Of course they dulled down a little bit, but still if you want to produce a more edgy sound, of course with the limitations of this string set, you can still inside of this range produce really much color. Regarding the price, which is also a factor, they are cheaper than the regular perpetual strings, but still cost more than the Eva Pirazzi Gold violin string set with the silver G string, which I always recommended and still find one of the best sets from the Pirastro universe. So in terms of a compromise between a good projection and still a lot of sound colors, I would rather go for a little bit of a lesser compromise and go with the Eva Pirazzi Gold violin string set with the G string in the silver, which is still lower tension than the perpetual regular strings, but not as low as the Perpetual Cadenza strings. So I hope this video helped you in your string choices. I always say in the best case you have to test those strings because they react so differently on different violins and also to different players. Certainly I can give you an outlook what the string can do, and I try to provide you with sound samples, and also I can give you information about the durability of the strings, but most of the strings, the synthetic core strings nowadays, are quite long lasting, so don't worry about that. But in the end, if you really want to know if this set is good for you, you have to try those strings yourself. I know it's a costly process to always buy different string sets and sometimes put them away after a few days if you don't like them. So at this point, I want again to thank my sponsor polychord.com, who sent me those strings for free so I can test them and make a video for them and link them in the description under this video. So you can click on them, and if you are from Europe, you can buy the strings there for a good price and a really good service. Thank you all for watching. Stay tuned for the next videos. Let me know if you tested the Perpetual Cadenza or the Perpetual Regular strings. Also tell me what strings I could test next. Keep on practicing, have fun practicing. See you in the next video. Bye bye.